Hey everyone, in this video we're going to take a look at the second story of chapter 32 from the Road to Latin textbook. Now this story is called De Procae Filiis II. So again, we're continuing the story about the children of Proca, right? Numitor and Mulius, their children and grandchildren, right? That's the whole Romulus and Remus story that we've been unpacking in this chapter. Before we dive into it though, if you want more resources, like I always tell you, you can find this story with a translation, the cases highlighted, just different things to help you understand it on my website. So feel free to check it out. There's also grammar help there. I'm not going to cover it in this video, but in the previous one, in the first story of chapter 32, I touched on a little bit. And if you go to the site, you can find all the grammar notes and videos, things like that, because there's a lot of pronouns and relatives and things like that in this chapter that can get a little bit confusing. So feel free to go check it out. The reason I'm saying this is before you dive into the story, you want to make sure that one, you have the vocab well, right? Or down well, I should say. And hopefully you do, because this is the second story of chapter 32. But again, review the vocab so you know what the words mean. And the grammar you should have a pretty good understanding of as well. You can learn the grammar and then come back to the story, do the story and then go to the grammar. I think it's a little better to learn the grammar first, just so you can see it in context and use the story as a way of understanding how the grammar all works. So I'll point out the different grammar points as we translate this together. The last thing I'd say is if you can find a partner in class, read the story out loud, right? You never want to shut off your speaking and listening skills or your, anything like that, kind of bringing the language to life. You can do that with a partner if you read the story to them and then have them read it back to you. That's always a good way to do it. You don't want to just translate these in your head. It's not the best way to learn a language, right? I say that a lot, but it is the truth. And for doing that, when it comes time for translating and reading, I would encourage you to do the read and reread method, which you hear me say all the time, but it works. So you would read through this story once, write down any problem areas you have, go look them up, whether it's vocab, grammar, whatever, and then come back to the story and read it a second, third, fourth time, as many as you need to, until you can do this without needing a dictionary or having to look up any of the grammar terms, right? If you can do that and read the story on its own without any help, that's a good sign that you understand it and you're in a really good place to move on. So with that being said, if you're at that point and you've already read through it a few times, keep going with the video. I'm going to walk you through it now. You don't want to have me be the first time you're seeing the story, right? You should use the second half of the video just to check what you did and make sure that what you translated, or how you translate the story rather, kind of comes close to what I'm doing. Again, not that mine's perfect, but it'll give you kind of a roadmap to understanding how this all works. Okay, so the story starts like this. You have Gemini, a Deo Marte qui erat pater eorum semper curabantur. So the Gemini here are the twins, okay? And it's talking about Romulus and Remus. So you're saying the twins, and you have this relative clause in the middle, I should say. You have qui, okay? So qui is referring to Marte, Mars. So you want to take this in kind of pieces. You could almost pretend that there's commas before the word qui, so between Marte and qui. And after the word eorum. The main idea is Gemini curabantur, right? The twins are taken care of, semper, always, a Deo Marte, by the god Mars. That's your main clause. Now, the subordinate relative clause here is qui erat pater eorum. It's sort of like a side note where you're getting more information about Mars. So he's not just Mars, he's Mars who was, right, qui erat pater eorum, their father. Okay, so qui is your relative pronoun. It's masculine singular because Mars is masculine singular. But remember, with relative pronouns, their case depends on what they're doing in their own clause. So in the phrase, who was their father, who is the subject? That's why qui is nominative here. So qui and Marte are two different cases. That's totally fine. When you're dealing with relative clauses, they don't need to be the same case. They just need to match in gender and number. Okay, so this is a good way to practice it. So again, you're saying the twins always were taken care of by the god Mars, who was their father. Then you have is lupam, quae in palatio habitabat ad pueros misit. So you're saying is, he, right? There's your third person pronoun, meaning Mars. So he sent, misit, a lupam, a she-wolf, ad pueros, to the boys. Okay, now we have another relative clause here. So you could almost pretend that quae in palatio habitabat is inside commas. Sometimes that's how you see it in English. That's your relative clause. So the quae is referring to the lupam, which is why it's feminine, right? So you're saying he, meaning Mars, sent to the boys a she-wolf, who, or which, depending on which one you want to translate it, or I guess who, not that it's a person, who habitabat, who was living in Palatio, on the Palatine Hill. Quae is your relative pronoun, right? It's referring to the lupam. That's why it's feminine and singular. But quae is the subject of its own clause, who was living on the Palatine Hill. That's why you have it nominative, okay? So again, it's just giving more information about the lupam. Then you have ea lupa liberos ad latibulum suum quod est sub palatio traxit et multos menses matram segesset. So this wolf, ea lupa, right? That wolf, or the wolf, you might even say. The wolf tracks it dragged, or it almost means like carried, not that she's dragging them off, but again, kind of carried or dragged the liberos, the children, ad latibulum suum, to her own den, you might say, right? Her den, I guess, right? Her lair. So she brought him to her little wolf house is the idea. Then you have quod est sub palatio, right? It's the latibulum, which, right? Which is on or at the foot of the Palatine Hill. Quote is your relative clause. It's giving more information about the latibulum. That's why it's quote. It's neuter, nominative, singular in this case. Okay, so you're just getting more information about the den which is at the foot of the Palatine. And multos menses, for many months, segesset. So this means something like she carried herself as, is kind of the idea. She almost acted as Matram, their mother, right? So she was basically the mother of these children, right? This is why we say Romulus and Remus were raised by a wolf. Okay. Then you have tum pastor, cuius nomen erat Faustulus, eos invenit et domum aduxorum acam portavit. So then a pastor, a shepherd. Then you have a relative clause here, cuius nomen erat. So cuius is my relative pronoun. It's referring to the pastor, right? But notice how cuius is genitive. So we're going to translate it whose. It literally means something like of whom, but whose is the best translation. Whose name, nomen, was Faustulus, okay? So here, whose is acting as the genitive. Really, it means the nomen, the name of whom is kind of what it means. But the cuius is referring to the pastor. That's why it's masculine singular. But in its own clause, it's functioning as a genitive. It's showing possession, whose name was Faustulus. Okay, so the pastor, or the shepherd rather, whose name was Faustulus, invenit eos, found them. And portavit domum, he carried them home ad uxorum acam, to his wife Acca. Okay, this is the famous Faustulus and his wife who find and raise Romulus and Remus. Then you have statem Acca pueros qui erant pulchri amavit. So immediately Acca, the wife, right, amavit, she loved the boys, the pueros. Our relative clause is qui erant pulchri. It's giving more information about the pueros, the boys. So they're not just the boys, they're the boys who were beautiful, right, or who were handsome, however you want to translate that. Okay? Then he continued. You have sic liberi rei filii numitoris, quem amulius a regno pepulerat servati sunt. So thus, or in this way, the children of Rhea, the daughter of Numitor, this is not a relative clause, by the way, this is just giving like a side note on Rhea, that's why they're all genitive, it's referring to her. So Rhea Silvia, the daughter, the filii of Numitor, right? So the children, you have servati sunt, that's my main verb, they were saved, right? Now you have a side note about Numitor here. You have a relative clause, quem. So that relative pronoun, remember the antecedent is the word in front of it. It's not talking about Rhea Silvia or the boys. It's talking about Numitor. So it's saying Rhea, right, the children of Rhea, the daughter of Numitor, whom Amulius had Pepulera had driven out from the regno, from the kingship or from the kingdom, however you want to translate that. It's giving you more information about Numitor. And in that clause, the main idea is Amulius had driven out Numitor, right? Remember, the pronoun is replacing a name. So if I put the name Numitor back in, it would be the direct object, which is why quem is accusative, right? You're saying whom Amulius had driven out of the kingdom were saved. So again, to do that line, you're saying in this way, the children of Rhea, the daughter of Numitor, whom Amulius had driven out from the kingdom or the kingship, were saved, right? The children were saved. Okay. Then you have multos annos, gemini quibus nomina Romulus et Remus data erant, cum Acca et Faustilo habitaba. Okay, so for many years, multos annos, right? It's the accusative duration of time. So for many years, the twins, right? The gemini, right? The twins, you have quibus here, which means like to whom, right? So to whom the nomina, the names Romulus and Remus, data erant, had been given. That's your relative clause. The quibus all the way to data erant is giving me more information about the twins. So not just any twins. The main idea is the gemini habitaban, they were living, the twins were living with Acca and Faustulus. That's my main clause. My relative clause is the twins to whom the names Romulus and Remus were given, right? That's the part that can't stand on its own. It's just giving more information about the antecedent, the gemini. Okay, so you have the next part. You have pastores quibuscum quotidie laboraban eos duces delegerum. So the shepherds, right, pastores, so shepherds, with whom, quibuscum, right, with whom they worked quotidie every day, right? Now, the with whom is my relative clause, quibuscum. It's giving me more information about the shepherds. The laborabant is not talking about the shepherds. It's really talking about Romulus and Remus. So it's saying the shepherds with whom they worked every day, right? Delegerant, the shepherds declared, or you might even say elected, is kind of one way to do delegerant. They elected eos, them, as duques, as leaders, meaning they thought of them as leaders, okay, leaders of the shepherds, right? Then you have post multos annos, Romulus et Remus, fabulum de avo numitore et eos fratre adiverum. So after many years, post multos annos, right, after many years, Romulus and Remus, they audiverunt, they heard a fabulum, a story, de avo numitore, about their grandfather, Numitor, and eos fratre, and his brother, right, which is Amulius. So they hear the story about their grandfather, okay? Then we end with this. You have Dende gemini quorum virtus erat maxima, album longum properavant, et amulium ex regno pepulerum. So next, or then, the twins, here's our relative clause again, quorum, whose, literally it means of whom, but whose virtue, right, or you could say the virtue of whom, erat maxima, was very great. So again, you're saying the main clause is gemini propaverant, the twins hastened to Alba Longa. Alba Longa doesn't need the preposition because it's the name of a city. You just use the accusative case. So my main idea is the twins hastened to Alba Longa. My side note relative clause is it's the twins whose virtue was the greatest, right, was very great. It's like a side note describing the twins, right? That's your relative clause. And so they hastened to Alba Longa, and they pepulerant, they drove out Amulium, right, Amulius, ex regno, from the kingship or from the kingdom, right? They kick him out as being king. Itaque numitor iterum rex albanorum factus est, et albae longae erat magnum gaudium. So numitor, again, iterum, right, again, factus est, was made rex albanorum, the king of the Albans. And albae longae, here we have the locative, in Alba Longa, there was magnum gaudium, or magnum gaudium, rather. There was great joy, right, great rejoicing. They're happy that he's back. Ea est fabula de Roma quam liberi Romani amabat. So this is the story. Ea est fabula. So this is the story about Rome, de Roma, which Roman children, liberi Romani amabat, which Roman children love. Okay. So again, we have a main clause. This is the story about Rome. That could be its own sentence. But you have a relative clause giving more information about it, right? So it's a story about Rome, which the children love, right? Amabat, which Roman children love. Etiam hodie nos qui eam fabulam legimus delectamur. So you have also today, or even today, you might say, nos, we, here's our relative clause, because the main idea is nos delectamur, we are delighted, okay? But we have a relative clause here of qui. So we who, legimus eam fabulam, we who are reading this story, delectamur, are delighted, okay? So this story, the second story of chapter 32, is a really good way to get relative clause practice because almost every single sentence has one. Remember what we said, the relative clause can't stand as its own sentence, right? It's giving more information about the antecedent, and it matches the antecedent in number and gender, but not in case. The case is what it's doing in its own sentence. And if you ever get stuck, you can remember, you could take the relative clause out of the sentence, it would still make sense. That's how you know you're looking at one. And you could also replace the relative pronoun with the name it's replacing, right? And you'd be able to figure out how it works in its own clause. Don't get too hung up on that now. If you're stuck on the grammar, go back and read through the textbook, right? You'll find all the notes there. But hopefully, if you read through that, you did the vocab, this made a lot of sense, and you're able to work through the story without too much trouble. Again, if you weren't able to do that, go back and practice. And once you hit that point where you can do this without needing vocab or grammar, you know that you understand what's going on. Okay? Good luck with it. If you have any questions, put them in the comments below. I'm happy to help. But otherwise, just keep practicing.